When someone dies, the loved ones engage in rituals of mourning. They organize a funeral. They pray over the dead. And long after someone dies, we preserve their memories in the stories we tell about their lives by visiting their grave or by keeping something they once owned. The memory of Joseph Chamberlain is celebrated across the city of Birmingham. For an Aboriginal immigrant, he was lost in an unmarked grave. In Birmingham, the legacy of Warlın is harder to find. It's like the oldest group of people in the world, right? But this person who has Aboriginal culture in them, they were saying that actually Aboriginal people are the oldest people in the world. They are like 75,000 years older than ancient Egyptians. But their culture is not known at all.
Yeah. Would you say the fountain was?
Yeah, the fountain, 1880.
Was this Chamberlain's spot?
Hmm?
Was that Chamberlain?
I don't think so.
Because I wouldn't have expected to see these like barriers.
In a newspaper article reporting on Joseph Chamberlain's funeral, it was said that in many ways Mr. Chamberlain was Birmingham and Birmingham was Mr. Chamberlain. Walking around Birmingham city centre, it is clear to see why that is a fitting description. Before he was elected as MP, Chamberlain was Mayor of Birmingham from 1873 to 1876. These changes that Chamberlain made to the city were not without controversy at the time. However, they did create a foundation of support for Chamberlain in Birmingham that he would always rely on. This support for Chamberlain is reflected in the infrastructure of the town centre, most notably through Chamberlain Square that includes a fountain as a memorial to his work in the city. Following his time as an MP, Chamberlain's next big political position would come when he became the Secretary of State for the colonies. With this position, he oversaw the ongoings of the Second Boer War that started in 1899 and ended in 1902. The devastation that happened resulted in 100,000 deaths, with long-lasting consequences for South Africa continuing to play out decades later.
I mean, I know a little bit more about Cecil Rhodes than I do about Joseph Chamberlain. I know that the two of them, they knew each other, and they were involved in the negotiations in South Africa. I think it was post the Second Boer War, and from what I know, I said they weren't very nice people when it came to equality. They were obviously very well known and rich people, and they did benefit of the inequality in South Africa. I think that's the most important thing to take from this. They did, and I think obviously people in Birmingham loved Joseph Chamberlain, but it's because people didn't really understand what was actually going on in South Africa. The empire stretched very far, sometimes out so far it was out of the reach from the actual British community, that the people didn't actually know what was actually going on overseas. And it's a tough one to talk about because it's so rich with history, and the history is all intertwined with various aspects, topics we talk about now, but equality, Black Lives Matter, reparations, all of that kind of talk going on right now, and but it all has to do with what happened back then. And I think a long story short is that a lot of England benefited from what happened there, the riches from other countries.
Once they had won the war, Chamberlain would visit South Africa, where he followed a programme that saw him attend banquets and give speeches. It was on his return that the Joseph Chamberlain Memorial Clock, as it stands in the Jewellery Quarter, was erected in memory of this visit to South Africa and Chamberlain's efforts on behalf of Empire. For many in the local community today, the Chamberlain Memorial Clock serves as a meeting place, considering its convenient location right at the heart of the Jewellery Quarter. However, its implications in colonialism and empire should not be overlooked. At the unveiling of the clock, Chamberlain said, "We hope that this memorial which you have erected in our honour may serve to mark happy hours for all of you, and as the days and as the years go by, may measure a steady advance towards two great objects you and we alike have constantly in view, peace and goodwill in South Africa, and the closer union of the British Empire." The hope with installing a new interpretation panel for the clock is that the global significance of Chamberlain is explored, offering much needed balance to narratives that focus heavily on his positive impacts on the city.
Warlın grows up with his Aboriginal family in Australia. He sees his own people, witnesses the usual rituals, eats different food. He also speaks his own language and learns about his own community and how his society functions. A 10-year-old is now moved into a whole other country, different dynamics, different looking people, different clothes. It's completely different, this reality.
Now the River Murray, or the Murray River as it's called, or also Mirundi, is very important to the people who come from that region. It is home. It fulfills a yearning that may be in people. It is what's passed down through what we call the miwi. It is passed down through generation after generation, that knowing who you are, where you are from, and the voices of our ancestors that still speak to us today.
Getting introduced to a new city and a different society dynamic, I can imagine Warlın being a very curious child that wanted to understand what's going around. However, this introduction into society also meant that everything he has learned back in Australia is put down.
What would have happened with Warlın, because he wasn't on country, his miwi would have become weaker. It is very much like the sound of the radio, or even today, that connection of our phone. So whilst we are up close and within scope, there is a strong connection. However, whilst we're away from it, it's still there, but it's somewhat weaker.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm Chelsea.
Hi, Chelsea. Deborah. Come on
Nice to
through.
meet you.
Thank you.
Very workshopy. I love it. I'm here today specifically.
In our research so far, we found one similarity between Joseph Chamberlain and Warlın. This is the fact that both men, at one point in their lives, worked in the leatherworking industry. Joseph Chamberlain, before pursuing politics, briefly inherited his father's business affairs in the office of the leather factory which his father owned. Warlın chose to pursue a leatherworking apprenticeship at Middlemore Saddles, which was located on Holloway Head, after realizing that work in the clergy was not his true calling.
You know, it's come from a living animal and you can see its life,
Yeah.
you know.
Such is the popularity of Chamberlain in Birmingham, it is not entirely surprising that there is also another Joseph Chamberlain Memorial Clock that exists in Birmingham. Located at the University of Birmingham, the carved words around the clock recognise his active role in securing the funding for the university in 1900. This transformed the Mason Science College into the university institution we recognise today. In return, Chamberlain remained the Vice-Chancellor of the university until his death in 1914. Old Joe, as it is commonly referred to, is a representation of Chamberlain's enduring legacy in Birmingham, especially in regards to education, which he, as the Mayor of Birmingham, fought to make free for children.
The culmination of Chamberlain's work back in Birmingham and the chief work of his last decade or so of life was the foundation of the University of Birmingham. It represented Chamberlain's best instincts. Compared to the small number of established universities at the time, it was to be modern. It was to be open and progressive. It recruited from all classes. It recruited women and men. It recruited from around the globe, from all nations and races. Chamberlain was not only its chief fundraiser, he was its main organiser and became its first chancellor.
The fact that a bursary called the Chamberlain Award is offered to current students based on household incomes is a testament to this legacy continuing today. Exiting the university via the train station offers a timely reminder of how the values Chamberlain upheld whilst trying to change Birmingham were reinforced when the university was founded.
Chamberlain's best remembered in Birmingham as the Lord Mayor who put into practice the civic gospel of social reform. He took into council control the gas and water services, and he cleared away the slums in the city centre to create the commercial boulevards of New Street and Corporation Street that we see today.
There are different ways to do this. There's a traditional way, like how saddlers do, but of course I don't know that way because I'm not trained as a saddler.
I am trying to find out more about why Warlın was attracted to working with his hands. Working with cured animal hide, was it a natural engagement for him to be attracted to the craft work? Working with his hands?
I can imagine that the tribe would have cured the skin of the animal, whichever animal it was, with natural products that would, I guess, would be easily available in their habitat. So seeing it, growing up with it from a child, he would have known no different. So I guess that's where the love of nature and using natural resources would have come from.
Could this be an example of the genetic memory he inherited from his people? The identity he inherited during his childhood before he was brought to the UK and from which he was cut off? It is interesting to consider this, given what Mark had shared with us about the stolen generation of Aboriginal children who were taken away from their Aboriginal communities and cut off from the education of beliefs, values, and rites of passage. Faced with choosing a vocation and seeing where he fits in British society, I have to ask myself, would Warlın have rediscovered himself in the process of working with leather?
Many will look at Sir Edward Eyre bringing Warlın into the UK as an act of kindness. Let's look into perspective. The Aboriginals did not ask for help. The English arrived in Australia and chose what they wanted to do with the people that lived there. The superiority complex was very clear from when they thought that the Aboriginal society was not the correct way of living. The spirituality and rituals from the Aboriginals were not respected. Warlın is cleared of all doubt by being introduced to Christianity. He cannot be an Aboriginal with their own beliefs. The church then becomes one of his favourite places. As a child, everything he's being taught has to be correct. This could have created conflict in Warlın's mind that he had no way to question because, again, he is far from his family and anyone from his tribe. His life has been turned upside down. He has no way of connecting back to his family. He has no way to see his family growing again older, sharing the dreams he had. Has Warlın really lived a happy life, or was he just constantly doing it because he had no choice? Was his connection to Christianity a way for him to continuously remember his family and hoping he could see them again?
The busy life of Chamberlain would slow down when he suffered a stroke a few days after his 70th birthday. Spending his final days at his Birmingham residence at Highbury Hall, Chamberlain would have found comfort in a place that had been built with a lot of his suggestions taken into consideration.
So it's really important for us to get a rounded view of who Joseph Chamberlain was. The preconceived notion that everybody knows who Joseph Chamberlain is one we need to stop really relying on and thinking about. And instead we need to build up the general public's knowledge, and certainly the young people of Birmingham's knowledge of who Joseph Chamberlain was. We need to build that pedestal to put him on. We need to make sure that people are aware of his legacy and his work in Birmingham before we start to question the choices and the decisions that he made. To start pulling away at that and expanding out that story, we first need to have this solid foundation of work to push out into the public and for people to be aware of, so that we're not just looking at those bad choices because we've just sort of explored them more, but actually we go right back to the basics and we make sure that everybody who comes to Highbury has an awareness of the whole story of Joseph Chamberlain and the legacy that's left behind and the work that he did during his time.
The views from the windows were said to be particularly popular with Chamberlain, as he would use this as an opportunity to show his guests the landscape of his beloved city, Birmingham. As different projects explore the complicated legacy of Joseph Chamberlain, Highbury Hall is also another great avenue from which such work can be done.
It seems like he's not very happy with being part of the society. The rivers that he once seen as a playing spot as a child are now a trading channel. The group rituals that he practiced with his family are now a church that he takes himself to do worship.
What happened during the stolen generation is many of our children were taken away from the parents, from the grandparents, to learn a new way, cut off from their own heritage. The Christian faith and the missionaries actually saved our people because governments and the world did not have the understanding of what our people needed. But the different denominations had a common goal, and that was there was a creator. And what would have happened is Warlın would have attached himself to his understanding of God through his teachings of Narundari, our spirit ancestor. His miwi may have been weakened. His connection to country was no more. But he would have applied the ways, the rules of living of the old people in a new world.